Okay, let's get started. We're going to try to run through a few bills before we need to do capital.
Thank you.
Let's start with 396.
Senate Bill 396, this bill, parts of it were discussed and considered at the pension subcommittee level. The bill is doing, as introduced, two things. It is making some alterations. There's statutory requirements for certain public safety officers when they are killed or die in the course of performing their duty. So there's a lump sum benefit, then there's some funeral benefits. The bill is adding in 911 specialists. Also for that benefit, the bill is creating a presumption for a death when one of those public safety officers is diagnosed with PTSD related to their job duties and dies by suicide. The bill also related to that, existing law has a authorization for the Secretary of Public Safety to award a death benefit if the decedent intended to bring about the decedent's death. That provision is being repealed. I think in the concept is in conjunction with creating the presumption for the PTSD. However, the PTSD provision does require diagnosis by a licensed medical professional. So the two of those in tandem, you may want to consider how those play out, because on the one hand, it's creating a presumption when there is that diagnosis. But then on the other hand, it's repealing a broader issue. So anything not falling within that presumption, the authorization would be going away.
So we're always talking about a case here where someone has taken their own life.
For that part of it, yeah, this is on page 6 of the
Okay,
bill.
so what if they had never gone through any treatment? What if they had never been?
Right, that's a question that's arisen. So I think, you know, in the context of somebody experiences a traumatic event, and then that, you know, after their shift is done, they go home and they haven't had an opportunity to seek any treatment to establish that diagnosis, that would not fall under this new presumption under on page 6. However, under existing law, it may fall under the authorization to award a death benefit if the decedent intended to bring about the decedent's death, so a suicide in that situation. But that piece in the bill is introduced is being repealed. That's that last line on page 6.
It's being repealed.
Correct. So under the
what's
bill,
going in its place?
just the presumption, but when there was a diagnosis for PTSD. So
Okay.
it's doing those two things. So there, you have some options if you wanted to address that issue where there's not an ability to get the diagnoses.
Okay, what are the options?
Well, I think the current law provision that authorizes, so it's a case-by-case basis. So you could have the presumption when there is the documentation, and then still leave the authority to award a death benefit on the case-by-case basis, and that would be able to address the situation where there's no opportunity or.
And right now, the authority has the ability on a case-by-case basis in all situations?
Yes.
So why, the presumption just adds a level. So in other words, it takes it out. That when that presumption is there, when the diagnosis is there, it takes it out of the authority's
Discretion. Correct. Right. So that makes that instance assured as a requirement.
Okay. You said there were two things this does?
There are a few other things. So on page 8 of the bill creates a requirement for disability benefits from the Maryland State Firemen's Association. If the member is physically or mentally incapacitated for performance of normal duties, if there was a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, acute stress disorder, or a trauma and stress-related disorder, and that.
Are we still talking about suicides?
No,
Not necessarily.
Not on this one. This is for disability from the state fire volunteer. So this would be for a member of a volunteer fire company. So this is not a state fund. And the testimony from the Firefighters Association was in support of the bill. So that's the next piece of the bill. Where the pension subcommittee weighed in begins on page 9. The bill is introduced, included provisions creating a presumption for state retirement and pension system disability benefits when there is diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. The testimony submitted by the agency is that there's nothing under current law prohibiting somebody from obtaining a disability benefit related to post-traumatic stress disorder or the other acute stress disorder and stress-related disorders. And actually, they reviewed back a couple of years, and for the most part, the claims related to PTSD had been granted. So their information was that there does not seem to be any current issues that they're aware of where, for whatever reason, people applying for disability based on post-traumatic stress or other stress-related disorders that are disabling conditions are being denied. So they have asked to strike that. There are no other disability presumptions in state pension code for disability provisions.
And then this is for
that.
who precisely?
This piece would be for the correctional officers' retirement system and the law enforcement officers' pension system. They included the local fire and police system in the draft, but that is that system was shut down back in the 2000s. It's still in the books because there's still some connected benefits being paid with it. But my understanding is there's no active membership in that system.
So I think that's the third issue you mentioned.
That's the third issue. The final issue is the bill. So in the first part for the lump sum disability, it was adding in 911 specialists. This fourth part of the bill, it's authorizing 911 specialists for governmental units to join the law enforcement officers' pension system. This has been an issue that's been before the pension subcommittee for the last few years. The advice has been consistent from the state retirement and pension system that their tax counsel has said that 911 specialists do not fit the job duty requirements under federal tax law for inclusion in those public safety plans. And authorizing or including them in that plan could have tax qualification issues for that plan.
So you have an amendment to take that out.
So the subcommittee struck basically the state pension and retirement provisions. So that starts on page 9, line 16, and then through the end of the bill. So what was left, which was more in the purview of the full committee, were adding 911 specialists to the lump sum death benefits, the presumption for suicides when there's the diagnosis of the stress-related disorders, and then the volunteer firefighters association disability provisions.
And how does that volunteer work, since they are obviously they're not paid employees?
Right. I'm not
Talk to me about that.
as familiar with that plan as I would be with the pension systems, but my understanding is it's a private fund, and there is a requirement the members permanently or temporarily disabled as a direct result of actively participating in fighting a fire, while going to or from a fire, while performing other duties necessary for the operation or maintenance of the fire company.
Yeah.
So basically, it's in the course of providing the services.
So, but there's no. Does it affect the functioning of the overall system because they're not paid? They're not employees. That you've looked at that. I guess is my question.
There's been no testimony submitted that that's a concern. My understanding is that's a fund for the volunteer firefighters. It's not it's not part of the state system.
Oh, it's in a separate fund?
It's a separate volunteer.
And it's just accessing,
It's establishing eligibility for those disability benefits.
no, I guess I'm just curious why, if it is a fund for the volunteers, why we even have any authority in terms of how they should access their own fund. But I'm going to let
I can check. I don't know if other members
Yeah,
are more familiar.
Senator Jackson.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There are commissions that are set up in each county that deals with volunteer fire and rescue services. And so there are requirements, even though you're a volunteer fire EMS, you have to meet all the training requirements.
Sure.
And that's handled, that's handled by the fire chief or a fire commission. So like Calvert was the last volunteer fire and rescue service, complete service in the state. They just recently picked up the EMTs. But that commission is made up through the counties. It has members from the volunteer fire and rescue service, members of the public safety, whatever that organization may be. There are qualifiers there. And what happens with those that are in volunteer service, should they undergo a traumatic incident, they have access to, the county's medical, and there's an independent medical authority that takes a look at those things. And I'll also say, if I might, Mr. Chairman, from the 911 specialists, I work for Homeland Security in the county, and part of our agency has a 911 specialist for Prince George's County. And there's history of some folks who may have been on the call when an officer got shot or a child died or something like that. And there is a system that's set up, everything from peer support through the entire mechanism through MIFRE and everyone else, that there is a system that's set up to make sure that those folks are able to perform the job. And if they're not, we have one member who is retired post-traumatic stress because he was on the line when an officer got killed, and he actually knew that officer personally, and he was unable to get back to work. And there is also an assessment process he has to go through so the counties are solvent because they make sure that there's a review that comes up to ensure that that person still cannot perform at that level. Lastly, I'll say, yes, that the committee, line 9, page 9, from page 9 on, we're not amended out, so.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions? There's a lot in this.
And JPR is secondary.
Okay. I mean, I think it's got some important stuff in it and helpful to some folks who deserve that help. But I still don't quite understand why we have authority over a fund that is part of the volunteers.
I'm not sure. I can look into the history. I'm not familiar with the.
Some of the funds that we have, like when, MSOF and all those folks.
Yeah.
Those guys fall under that, so.
Yeah. Okay. Are people generally feeling good about this? It's just, I have that one last question. Senator Bailey?
Sure. Coming from an area in St. Mary's where we have 100% of our fire is volunteer, there is, the way it works for them is even their prescription plans and their retirement, after they retire, they can jump into the state fund. Right. Once they've done so many years and made all their LoSAP hours.
Right.
And St. Mary's treats it, if we have an online death, differently than Calvert. Calvert, actually, we passed a bill last year or 2 years ago that now they get a $10,000 death benefit, whether they were working or not, just by being a member of the volunteer fire department. So I would say this. I think it's a good bill. I think it is very complicated as we look at it, though, because it's got a lot of tentacles. To make sure that we're doing the right thing.
And St. Mary's does have a property tax
Yes, I've heard that. Evidently Somerset does now, thanks to you. Yeah. All right, we're going to hold that, obviously, just for a little bit, but I'd like to get that done. 409.
Okay, for this bill, you do have a reprint on your desk. And the amendments that are in this reprint were offered by Senator Lewis Young. And I marked it up, kind of leading you through the bill, because this is also a big one. Globally speaking, it deals with local bonding authority for economic development through two programs. One, just the general local economic development revenue bonds, and then two, through the tax increment financing provisions. So you can see also globally what it does is these authorities that local governments use for economic development, it gives them additional powers and authorities in terms of spending money, what they can spend the money on. They have leasing authority, purchasing authority, so it expands the scope of what is currently in law. So really the meat of it begins on page 7 of the reprint. So it clarified this, so the local governing body it's all authorizing, but if they're going to do it, then they should do a resolution establishing the area for development, a plan for the development, and then authorizing this authority arm to do the development. The amendment adds some of the things that you guys heard from MACO, and some additional, what the sponsor is referred to as guardrails, sponsor of the amendment. So this is the idea that the legislative body would still have auditing and oversight of an authority, as well as if they do adopt a resolution that they can establish which of the provisions in these laws that they actually want prior approval authority of. And then you can see that this amendment would also add a report. The next substantive part is on page 8, which this is the list of activities that an authority can do. So it's talking about owning, holding, purchasing, selling, leasing, insured, sue and be sued. So that's a couple of pages here. On page 9 is the next part, that within this list, an authority can acquire real property that's outside of a project area. As introduced, it was only if the board of directors determines that it will benefit the project area. This proposed amendment adds that the authority receives prior approval of the legislative body before doing that. Then the rest is basically authorizing an authority to also sell bonds, use proceeds from those bonds for these purposes as opposed to just the local governing body. On page 12, this gets into the tax increment financing. And you can see at the bottom of page 12, it talks about a bond that can now be issued by an authority, obviously still related to kind of the original authorizing act of the governing body of the political subdivision by resolution. So the local governing body is still approving the fact that bonds can be issued, but then the actual authority can issue the bonds. Then, let's see. Also has similar expansion of the use of TIF proceeds. It's on page 16, continuing to 17. There is an amendment on page 17 that if they're related to a housing project and they're acquired under kind of so when a local authority has a TIF, they create a special fund where the TIF proceeds would go into. And so that's what this cross-reference is here in page 20, is those funds. More. Then on page 19, because the statutory law in the code for TIFs, it actually states that it does not apply to Baltimore City, the bill pulls in the Baltimore City charter and makes the same amendments to that with relation to the TIF, new powers of the authority. So that is the bill and the amendments that have been offered.
Questions?
Prince George's County, for instance, where does the county council fit in the scheme of things here?
So
Will
this bill,
there are 26 municipalities. How will each municipality be given the authority to do this? And then where does the county council fit in?
so for Prince George's County, this bill doesn't change anything that currently exists for Prince George's County.
Say that again?
This bill doesn't change anything that currently exists for Prince George's County. So over time, Prince George's County came in and kind of wanted the structure on their own. And so they came in with their own Prince George's County bill to do these things. And it has been explained to me by someone in a county development authority that this bill is actually intended to allow everybody else to kind of structure their authorities in the same way that Prince George's County currently structures their authorities.
You led the way, Senator.
They're trying to get to.
And I was just using Prince George's
Well,
County.
no, it happens to be the example. It is the example. You led the way in Prince George's County. So everybody's trying to copy what Prince George's County did.
Oh, dear Lord, have mercy. Oh, Lord, have mercy.
Any other questions? Senator McCray.
So when you say authority, you just mean like the governing body or like?
No,
how do you
so-
define authority?
It's a defined term that it's currently, a lot of counties call the authority like a redevelopment authority, industrial development authority, revenue authority. So it's like quasi,
So we got like BDC, like is it the BDC could be an authority or like they're quasi agency, but like?
if, I don't know specifically, if the city council relies on them and uses them to help with infrastructure improvement and they can use the bond proceeds of the city, then they would fit into this. If the city council develops a development plan, these blocks need to get redeveloped, here you go, BDC, you have these powers that we're giving you to do that.
And can you just explain like the TIF thing? Like the TIF, we do TIFs in the city. I do know that it then impacts our education formula. It then impacts these indirect things, but I don't know how this specific bill then impacts these other things.
So, let me think. The TIF provisions in here, as I understand it, is, and as I read it, the TIF, the proceeds, the additional revenue that's gathered, can be used for a greater number of things. So multiple different types of projects or functions within a project. They're on page.
So usually TIFs is like have to be impact public spaces that everybody can, a park, something like that. Like when you say it's being broadened, what's the example of? So I know how TIFs are used currently, but I
Yeah.
don't know what's being broadened.
If you look at page 16 of the reprint, this is the list of additional infrastructure improvements that can happen under this bill. Streets, utilities, streetlights, stormwater,
That's no
fencing,
problem.
noise, a lot of, and continuing
I got it.
on and on.
I want to give significant deference to the sponsor. When I look at all the folks that
You like the sponsor,
testify,
don't you?
I love the sponsor. Everybody that testified, like I see independent jurisdictions. I didn't see my city weighing, so I see Charles, I see Frederick. Can I just like bump it past my jurisdiction just
Sure.
to understand, like, what are their thoughts? Mako supportive, so I'm assuming they would have ran it through Mako if they didn't support it, but I just do want to. Yeah, they not the city though.
Yeah, I was looking for the same.
Yeah.
Okay?
Okay, so we're holding on that. We need to get on the Capitol, so Yes. I do. Three more minutes. Oh, well, that's not even on the list.
That's a good one.
Capital in 5 minutes. Nice try.